Christian University, and I'm going to be talking to you today about behavioral disabilities and the interventions that our public school provides for them. Once again, my name is Todd. I'm a senior here. This is my last assignment for my senior seminar for my bachelor's degree. Very excited about that. I'm currently a teacher at a high school in Colorado Springs, where over the last 3 years I worked with social, emotional, and behavioral disability students. As I was working on my bachelor's in psychology, I was able to get up close and personal with them and able to do a lot of study and research and observation on the abnormal psychology side of that job. So let's get talking about some behavioral disabilities. The specific behavioral disabilities we're going to talk about are concurrent to like oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder, antisocial personality disorder, and more. They're pretty intermittent behavior, explosive behavior, things like that is what we can get from them. So what's the difference between a behavioral disability, serious emotional disorder, or both? So we're going to use these terms, behavioral disability and SED, interchangeably. A behavioral disability is just an official diagnosis given by a licensed psychiatrist. So if I had been having some issues and I was flagged by a school official or school psychologist, and then my parents and the school administration guided me to take some more tests and go to an outside licensed psychiatrist, they may give me an official diagnosis of conduct disorder or of operational defiance disorder. ADD, ADHD, all of those things constitute as behavioral disabilities. Pyromania, kleptomaniacs, all of those things become behavioral disabilities. The prognosis, the diagnosis, the treatment, and the cause or course of these disabilities are detailed for us in the Diagnostic Statistician's Manual, the 5th edition of that, commonly known as the DSM-5. A serious emotional disorder is just a term used by the state of Colorado to flag behavioral disabilities in students early on. These flags are typically set by early elementary, and they refer to typical social, emotional, or behavioral regulation disabilities. It is kind of referred to as a catch-all without much more description. The state of Colorado gets their standards and criteria for SED through the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act of 2004. But both of these things, they involve emotional and behavioral regulation. They work hard to define those and figure out what the best interventions for them are and how to progress. So we're going to look at the exact things that constitute a behavioral disability. Remember, we're using that word interchangeably with SED. According to the DSM-5, these behavioral disabilities are real issues with the self-control of emotions and behaviors. Plenty of the students that I've worked with over the last few years have a very hard time at not being in a constant triggered state. Many of their it can be hard sometimes to separate their irritability with their disability because they are very reactive to every situation they are in, and so often in a constant state of like a constant triggered state. But the specific thing is that these are behaviors that violate the rights of others. So either they're harming other people or they're doing things that could harm other people or are being an inconvenience, right? Behaviors, and there are also behaviors that bring this individual into significant conflict with societal norms and authority figures. And that's where we get back to this kind of perpetration of, it's a continuous cycle of not being able to control and then getting yourself into these triggered states with societal norms and authority figures because you feel like you're fitting in, but you're not. According to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act of 2004, a behavioral disability or SED is based on this criteria of, first off, an inability to learn that cannot be explained by intellectual, sensory, or health factors. And so it's this idea that there is something going on that isn't health. It's not necessarily a cognitive issue, and it's not a sensory issue that keeps them from being attentive or putting in effort in the workplace or in their classrooms. This sort of block, this inability to learn, right? The second one is an inability to build or maintain satisfactory interpersonal relationships with peers and teachers. So we can see that mirrored on the third point in the DSM-5. These students just have a hard time seeing peers or other people in the same light of them. They constantly feel like in a state of combatancy. I can clearly remember one student that she was constantly feeling that she was ready to harm herself or harm someone else at the slightest emotional flare up. So it could be something all the way from she was just in a bad mood to somebody wouldn't be quiet during class and was kind of annoying her, all the way to she remembered or somebody said something about something that happened years and years and years ago. It was a lot of triggers every day that we did not know how to work around. And so her and her friends often were in fights or in things. We could clearly see that students with SED or with these behavioral disabilities seem to have relationships with their peers around the 5th grade level, and instead of the 10th or 11th grade level. And so it was very interesting to see older students kind of operate as elementary students in their social lives. And then inappropriate types of behavior or feelings under normal circumstances. So that's like exactly what I was just describing. Something very normal, normal interaction. Hey, will you please not do that? Or will you please be quiet? Or can you put that down? Do you need a break? Anything like that can be a flare of emotion that isn't really quite understandable. So the two main prognoses, how do these behavioral disabilities get there? The first is environmental. This is the largest one, and a disrupted flow of caregivers at a young age. So if there's multiple people in and out of the house or foster home systems, kind of things like that. A harsh, inconsistent, or neglectful child rearing, so a lot of abuse, a lot of just unstable situations. And then temperament, this ability for emotional reactivity at a young age. Those are the two largest precursors that we see. Environmental is going to be an interesting one that we're going to look at quickly because of the environment these students are in. And we see a lot of students with diagnosis come from this environment, but in a Title I low-income, high-risk school, we also see a lot of the general population of the student body have come from environments that are similar to this. So we want to be looking into a new place of not only are we giving interventions to students who have and are diagnosed with social emotional disorders, but the students who may have gone through the same processes and are coping with those things in a different way. The treatment, once again, this is kind of hard. The treatment of behavioral disabilities comes down to essentially a few things. Either family intervention, which is parent training the parents to be aware of, discipline, and react correctly to a student with a social emotional disability or a child with social emotional disability, and family therapy, just big group therapy with all your family, and then individual interventions. This is a hard thing to look at when it comes to treatment because we know that students with SED and behavioral disabilities are coming from environmentally harsh environments. And so many of them are unstable or already don't have family situations set in place. And then the only treatment to progress from that or get better from that is family therapy or family intervention. And then, so that stability is typically not there for them to access that treatment. And then also is SED is diagnosed early at childhood or early childhood or adolescence, and so their individual interventions are not going to be able to be taken into their own hands. So quickly, we're going to talk about the role of the school in behavioral disabilities. My school specifically, our student body is 93% free and reduced lunch. We have a 60% 4+ ACE score, which is a childhood trauma test that goes up to 10, and so 4+ is pretty high. That's a lot of students that have childhood trauma and childhood things. We have 20% of our ELL, and we have English language learners, and we have 20 SED students. So our school, they do these tiered support systems. If you have an emotional disability, you're either in tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3. Tier 3 being the highest. But they really simply are there to evaluate the behavior and then focus on the success of academic goals. And then our school psychologists and psychiatrists formulate academic and behavior goals for our all of our special education students, and they evaluate and test disability statuses to see if our students can progress. The only thing that I wish to change as school-based interventions continue is that we would start to develop the whole person more, that we look at the humanistic side of these students and understand that not everyone that has a diagnosis is hurting like we think they are, and not everyone without a diagnosis is not hurting. I think that with so many of our students coming from similar environments as our students that need emotional supports, that we could really develop our psychologists and our psychiatrists into roles that are taking data and observing the roles of all students, or the ability of all students for social emotional behavior, and working on interventions that are community based for the entire school, not just students in special education, but for the entire school. Once again, my name's Kai. Thank you guys for listening to me about behavioral disabilities. This is something I enjoy a whole lot, and how it plays into education. This is also something that I'm very, very passionate about. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your year, and I hope to hear from all of you soon. Thank you, guys.